Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Checkerboard chat. Great to see you guys jumping on. We'd love to hear where are you tuning in from. Hi, Lindsay from Nebraska. Hi, Bobby from St. Louis. Nice to see you guys. So today's topic is a pretty good one. I'm excited to talk about with you today, and I've got Dr. Mary Beth Gordon here with me. Have you ever wondered if you should be feeding a omega-3 fatty acid supplement? Do you even know what your horse's omega-3 fatty acid requirement is? Are omega-6 fatty acids bad? Have you ever asked yourself any of these questions? If so, it's a good thing you tuned in today because we are going to answer these questions, hopefully more. So please, ask us your questions about fatty acids in the comments. We're going to just jump right into it today. So I'm Dr. Kelly Vineyard. I'm one of the equine nutritionists with Purina. I'm here from my home office in Florida. And I've got Dr. Mary Beth Gordon here with me. She's here with us from her home office in New York. And of course, both of us work also out of our research farm in St. Louis. So the reason why I'm especially excited about this topic today is the topic of omega-3 fatty acids was something I spent a long time studying. It was the topic of my Ph.D. dissertation. I've written some papers about the topic. I have a chapter in a textbook. I'm a co-author with my professor that I worked with, Dr. Lori Warren, on the topic of omega-3 fatty acids. So you guys are going to have to forgive me if I talk too much about them today. Maybe Mary Beth, you can rein me in a little bit.
That's it.
But Mary Beth, you're the reason you're here is because this has been on your mind for several years leading up to a launch of a couple new products, our Omega Match products that focus on delivering high quality omega-3 fatty acids to horses. And so we're going to get a little peek behind the curtain here coming up about how this product was born. Sure. Oh gosh, it's so good to see so many of you jumping in.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Hi, Debbie from New York, Jason from Texas. Thanks, guys. So why don't we kind of jump right in and let's just answer the question, how do I know if my horse is getting enough omegas in their diet? And most people don't realize that horses have a requirement for both omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. And actually, there's only an established NRC requirement for omega-6 fatty acids. And the NRC is basically a book that we nutritionists use. It has all of kind of the research-based nutrient requirements established by science for horses. And right now, there's only an omega-6 fatty acid requirement that's been established. That's not to say omega-3s aren't required either. They're actually both required. We know that because horses cannot make omega-6s in their own body, and they cannot not make omega-3s in their own body. They have to get them through their diet. So what's the requirement for omega-6? Well, the NRC establishes it at about 0.5% of dry matter intake. So what does that mean? If you kind of make the assumption horses are eating 2% of their body weight in dry matter, that equates to about 45 grams a day of omega-6 fatty acids. So we know that, that's kind of a good place to start, right? Where do they get these? From forage. So surprisingly to a lot of people, forages contain quite a bit of polyunsaturated fatty acids, both omega-6s and omega-3s. So yeah, that's where they come from. Anything you want to add to that, Mary Beth?
Yeah, there's a great little background because most people don't know that horses have a requirement and that the requirement is actually only in omega-6s in the NRC because everyone talks so much about omega-3s, right? It's all omega-3. And we've got a great question from Haley here about what is the best source of omega-3s in the diet. And, that's one of the things we've been trying to figure out over the years. When it comes to the research we do at the Purina Animal Nutrition Center, we've tested all different types of omega-3s and omega-6s and different oils and looked at palatability. And so one of the concepts that helped us come up with these new products that we just launched is, well, in nature, where do horses get omega-3s from? And a lot of people don't realize that the number one usual source of abundant omega-3s in a horse's diet is through fresh pasture. Because we think about pasture grass and the greenness of grass and all that goodness, but we don't think about the fatty acids in grass and that there's actually more omega-3s in fresh pasture than there are omega-6. So that can be a very abundant source of omega-3s in the horse's diet. And it actually helped us to set the basis for these products because we were like, okay, well, in a way, can we be inspired by what Mother Nature has already done for horses and look at how many omega-3s horses would get in their diet when they're out eating pasture, and then use that sort of as a benchmark for setting the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, and then how many omega-3s horses are getting in a day. And there's different types of omega-3s, right? So there's like the type that come from pasture grass or from ground flaxseed. That's called alpha-linolenic acid. And there's other types of omega-3s called EPA and DHA, and they more specifically come from fish oil and marine algae and that type of thing. So we've done research with all of those, but that just gives you a little more info about omega-3s and where they come from.
Yeah, and I see Joy mention that she feeds flaxseed, and that's a very common source of omega-3 fatty acids. There's always the question to grind or not to grind, and grinding it does make the inner workings of that seed more accessible to the digestive enzymes of the horse. That being said, it also will make it go rancid, maybe more quickly. So you have to keep that in mind, like how often you're going to feed the ground flax. Feeding whole seed flax, they can still chew it up and access that as well to some extent. Flax oil, the difference there, it's 100% fat. So if you're feeding flaxseed oil, that is all, fat, whereas the ground flax, there's protein, there's some carbs, there's, other components in that seed as well, but it is also a high fat. They're both good sources of omega-3s, in my opinion. So we've kind of covered some omega-3 stuff, but the question of omega-6s, I hear a lot. Are omega-6s bad? What's the answer, Mary Beth?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And actually, Kelly, you did work on this in your PhD, looking at different types of oils fed to horses. And actually, we reference this all the time, and other scientists reference it all the time too, because everyone expected, maybe corn oil is bad for horses and that type of thing, because it has more omega-6s than other types of oils like flaxseed oil, for example. And actually, that wasn't the result of the study. It was that all different types of fatty acids could be very good for horses. Right. So where it gets a little tricky is that the omega-6s, when you actually look at the biochemistry of omega-6 and sort of read the book and read the papers and read the science, is that omega-6s in their biochemical pathway can lead to more inflammatory compounds, things called prostaglandins or leukotrienes in the horse's diet. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you do want a balance of omega-3s and omega-6s together. And when you look at horse diets, especially in comparison to something like human diets, horses already have a pretty darn good balance of omega-3s to omega-6s. So omega-6s aren't necessarily bad. And horses do tend to get a good amount of omega-3s from pasture and actually even from hay. So the omega-3s do decrease in the hay when it is, properly dried and stored, but there are still some in there that horses can utilize. So omega-6s are not bad, but if you have a horse that doesn't have access to pasture and isn't getting any omega-3s in any other form of the diet, and if you're feeding especially high levels of omega-6, so say, for example, you're feeding a couple cups of corn oil a day or something like that, you can use an omega-3 supplement to help balance that out a little more.
Right. And that's, I see Jason's question here. Pasture's not very prominent right now, and that's common, when it's drought, also in the wintertime. And so they're feeding, pelleted feed, some alfalfa and coastal. And so, kind of going back to what you just said, Mary Beth, there are essential fatty acids in that alfalfa, in that coastal Bermuda grass hay. We won't know unless we test it exactly how much. I think it's safe to say the older the hay is or the longer it's been sitting around, those fatty acids do degrade over time. So if you're feeding maybe last year's hay, or it's starting to get, towards the end of the batch, you might wonder if it would be a good opportunity to bring in some supplemental fatty acids. If that pelleted feed you're feeding is a fat added feed, 8% fat, 10% fat, there's going to be some omega-3s and omega-6s pulled in, depending on the feed you're feeding. So you're also going to be getting some supplemental fatty acids that way. But kind of going back to omega-6s being bad, I mean, if they were bad, there wouldn't be a requirement for them in the diet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
sure.
I think that, it's important, I think, for everybody to remember that. What we're aiming for is a good balance and a good ratio. What's the ideal ratio? Is kind of the next question. And unfortunately, science doesn't have a great answer for that yet. I think that, most horse diets are going to fall between that kind of 1 to 5 omega-3 to 6 to 1 to 10 omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. If they're eating like a concentrate plus forage diet, if you're feeding a lot of corn oil, like Mary Beth mentioned, you may start getting a little bit too far over onto the omega-6 ratio for sure. But as far as like what's ideal too, I always like to go back to pasture. Like what's in pasture, we do have primarily omega-6s, omega-3s when you're comparing the two fatty acids in pasture. So we know that maximizing the omega-3s in the ration is going to match pasture, right? And so that's sort of what we're kind of looking for. So, going back to sources, we mentioned pasture being a really great source of omega-3s. There's a couple of other places where your horse is going to get their omega-6s and omega-3s in their diet. And I created a little table. Actually, it's kind of a big table. There's a lot of numbers on here. So I just want to point out at the top, you see pasture and hay. They're very low in fat. You've got, the overall fat content is low. But when you look over in the column where it says N6, it's, 0.39, 0.36% omega-6 fatty acids. The next column over is omega-3. And you can see that pasture and hay have more omega-3s than they do omega-6s. So you've kind of got a very low, omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in forage. Flaxseed was mentioned. Again, a very good source of omega-3s. And also plain flaxseed is 42% fat. You can compare that to oil being 100% fat. So on a per weight basis, you're going to get more omega-3s from your oil than your flaxseed. But that's not to say flaxseed is a bad source. It's not. It's a great source of omegas. And then just to compare our new ration balancer feed, Omega Match, it's very similar to pasture in terms of the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. It's almost the same. And that was by design, right?
Completely by design. Yep, exactly right.
And I just want to point that out. So yeah. And Mary Beth, do you want to talk about, on the flip side, you supplement fat and there's oils. And what are some of the oils where you're going to get some omega-3s?
Yeah, for sure. So when we were working on these products that we're going to talk about them very, very soon, I promise. We developed the ration balancer that has this very pretty much exact omega-3 to omega-6 ratio as pasture. But then we certainly knew that horses would be on other types of diets as well, like horses that thrive and need, diets like Ultium or Strategy or Omeline. But how do we get more omega-3s into those horses? And so we worked with a company called Nature's Crops, and we've brought this product to life called ahi flower oil that is very high in omega-3 fatty acids. And then you can use that to supplement your horse's diet. So if you have horses that are doing well, like Jason said, they're on pellet and they're on some alfalfa and coastal hay, and you want to put them on a supplement because they're doing well on their diet and you're not necessarily going to change their feed, then we absolutely would recommend the ahi flower oil that's high in omega-3s. Also, all from plants, all from nature. Yeah.
And so, a lot of people know about flaxseed oil as being a good omega-3 source. We're excited to introduce ahi flower as a new source, because the other kind of one source we think about is fish oil, right? And I actually did a lot of my research. We use marine derived sources of omegas, and they are very high in what you mentioned, EPA and DHA, and those only come from marine sources, or so we thought. So fish oil, as you can see, is a total about 28.1% total omega-3s, and that's almost all EPA and DHA and some others, DPA and some things. But if ahi flower oil has this fatty acid called SDA, and I have a column here, stearidonic acid, and it's very unique in that we have done the studies that show that in the horse's body, it can convert that SDA to EPA. And it's the only plant-derived oil that we've seen that can do that in a significant way. I mean, honestly, that's really why we were so excited about ahi flower oil, right, Mary Beth?
Yeah, for sure.
It really was, it's this unique ability and its unique content of these high, what we like to call high value omegas. It's not just the ALA, this SDA, and there's also some omega-9s in there. That's another checkerboard chat topic. But there are a lot of high value omegas in that ahi that for me is someone who I'd never seen it before. It was very unique, and it's really exciting to be able to have access to it now. So let's talk about the way this came to light in your kitchen. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. So I started working on this formula. I wanted to make a high omega-3 diet for horses. I thought to myself, okay, I'm inspired by Mother Nature and what pasture brings to the table. Can I develop a feed that is going to have those benefits for horses? And oh, by the way, will it stick together and will they eat it? And I didn't want to take up a plant production time and make a 3,000 ton run. And I didn't even know if the darn thing would stick together. And I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to start with? And I'm like, all right, I'm going to start with Timothy hay as my base. And we don't have any other feeds that have Timothy hay as the entire base of the feed. And I'm like, well, how am I going to add the omegas? And I'm like, I want to go with ground flaxseed. Ground flaxseed can do a really great job bringing those omega-3s to the table. And then I started thinking about, well, what else do I need in the formula? And I'm like, well, I want the gastric support, so I'm going to put Outlast in there. And okay, now I need to balance the calcium in Outlast. So what can I balance naturally with calcium? And I'm like, oh, rice bran. Rice bran has high phosphorus, and I can help to balance that out. And as I'm putting all this together, I'm like, all right, well, I don't even know if horse is going to eat this concoction or if it's going to stick together, like I said. So I literally went, bought Timothy pellets, bought ground flaxseed, mixed it all up in the NutriBullet in my kitchen. There's pictures of it. I added water. I got it to stick together. I stuck it in my food dehydrator. So I made those little nuggets. It sort of looks like horse manure. It looks the same going in as it does coming out a little bit. And dehydrated them in my dehydrator. And then they made these little, almost like cookies, like horse cookies. And I went down and my horses ate them right out of my hand. And I was like, ooh, we might be onto something here. And then I had a little more confidence that I could actually put something together in our formulation system and then use some plant time to start making a formula that we could then test at the farm.
Yeah. So, fast forward 2 years later, 3, I mean, this was several years ago.
That was fall of 2017 in my kitchen.
And and one of the questions that I see, when you now look at the formulation, it's a soy-free formula.
Mm-hmm.
It is, there's no soy in there. There's no alfalfa in there. There's no barley. And there's no corn, right? So, not only is this matching the omegas in the pasture, it's a great ration balancer to kind of balance a horse's diet that maybe has lower calorie needs, but there's a little oats in there. And people ask me that a lot, and I've heard that. So can you explain why there's a little bit of ground oats in there?
Yeah. So we had made an earlier formulation without oats in it. And quite honestly, we couldn't get enough horses to eat it well. So it was so very low in sugar and starch and around 5% total. And some horses would take 12 hours to eat 1 pound of the feed. And we'd put their feed in and they'd eat their hay before they ate this. So we're like, okay, we need to make adjustments so that we can make sure horses eat it. So we were able to keep the ratios because it was all about keeping those ratios of omega-3 to 6 correct, but added a little bit of ground oats in there, and the horses were happy about it. It's still completely fine to feed metabolic horses. It's got less than 12% sugar and starch total. We've done the glucose and insulin dynamic testing on it to show the glucose insulin response to feeding. It's very low. It's very similar to feeding your horse grass hay. So it doesn't suddenly make the diet high starch or anything like that.
Yeah. And, and speaking of the studies, I mean, after we kind of came up with this original formula, the next step is always doing the research to kind of look at the physiological effects in the horse. And one of the things that sets this ration balancer apart too is the reflection of the omega-3 content of the blood plasma. And we wanted to make sure that we could match in horses that were eating omega match 2 pounds a day on dry lot. So they had no access to any pasture whatsoever, just hay and omega match. And we measured their blood, and we specifically looked at the omega-3 levels in that plasma compared to horses that had free choice pasture access. And we did find that there was no difference. They did have the same levels of omega-3s in their blood. So that was really important, I think, for us to confirm that we wanted to help these horses that didn't have a lot of access to pasture in terms of omega-3 supply. There's also 1,000 IUs of vitamin E in this when you're feeding it as directed. There's also a therapeutic level of biotin in omega match when you feed it at the recommended rate, because of, just we're trying to recreate some of those benefits, horses walking around, getting blood flow to their hooves, and, maybe they're not getting as much turnout as a horse on pasture would. So we're trying to bring the goodness of pasture into a feed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I've been fortunate enough to spend time in South Florida during the winter, and these horses get very little to no turnout, especially the high performance horses and even race horses. They hardly see a blade of fresh green grass. And I've always thought about them nutritionally. Well, what can we do to bring the benefits of pasture to these horses that are only out, for 45 minutes a day? And when they are out, they're basically in a little sand paddock with some, scrub grass in there and that type of thing. So when we designed the formula and brought this and the ahi flower oil to market, it was all about how can we bring these nutrients to the horses that aren't getting them.
Yeah. So I'm just looking here if there are any more questions that we haven't addressed so far. Okay. Melissa asked about omega-6 and 3s with ulcers or with it. So there's a little bit of work out there that's been done looking at feeding different types of oils and how it may affect the occurrence of ulcers. But specifically, ulcers in horses really are very responsive to pH management. So, if I'm worried about ulcers, I'm going to first focus on pH management of the gastric environment. But there is some work, replacing carbohydrates with some fats. Bringing some fat into the diet can be beneficial. There's a couple studies with some actually corn oil showing that it reduces the incidence of the glandular ulcers. So, but certainly omegas are not the first thing we think about when helping with ulcers. It's more of like pH management and buffering and things like that. But good question.
Yep.
So let's, rice bran oil. I think maybe Nicole is asking about that as a source of omega-3s. And so rice bran oil actually is very rich in omega-6 fatty acids. It's low in omega-3s. It's a good source of polyunsaturated fat. Omega-6s aren't bad. we like using rice bran oil to bring in fat into the diet. So it's a good source of fat, but it's not necessarily a good source of omega-3s. Okay. So we keep getting some more questions. EPA. We did mention EPA a couple times. You want to take this one, Mary Beth?
Yeah, sure. So EPA stands for eicosapentaenoic acid, and it's one of those omega-3s that does have some good data related to its anti-inflammatory properties. And where it comes into this conversation is when we talk about the ahi flower oil supplement, because the SDA or the stearidonic acid converts to EPA in horses through the ahi flower oil supplement. So usually EPA is only supplied through those through fish oil or a marine algae. but we think it's pretty cool that you can give your horses the ahi flower oil and then they will convert it to EPA. And it helps with the anti-inflammatory support of the horse.
Right. So if you're feeding any type of omega-3 supplement specifically for the goal of like reducing the inflammatory pathways, you want to feed something that's going to have some EPA in it, right? Because it's really the EPA and DHA that we're targeting. So, and the ahi flower oil, again, is the plant-based oil. You can get it from fish oil. Horses don't love fish.
That's true. We haven't mentioned that
spit
yet.
it across the room at you some days. But fish oil will contain EPA and DHA, and then the ahi flower oil, it's plant-based and it will convert to EPA. All right, we got a question from Sherry about feeding enrich and with alfalfa and hay, and the horse is a hard keeper, and she's adding amplify. Can you add omega match for more fat? Well, that's an interesting question. So first of all, I would say I would want more information about your horse being a hard keeper and some things like that to give you a specific recommendation. And you can always call us or email us at our Purina customer service, and we can give you customized recommendations. But just looking at this, you're feeding Enrich, which is a ration balancer, and Amplify, which is a fat supplement. Omega Match is kind of both of those combined. It's a ration balancer with fat added. So theoretically, it might work to replace your Amplify and Enrich with Omega Match. You wouldn't, I don't necessarily think you need to feed Enrich and Omega Match at the same time. If you're going to do that, just feed Omega Match because it's a ration balancer. It just has the fat added. However, if your horse is a hard keeper, maybe a ration balancer isn't the right product to begin with. Maybe you need to transition to something that is a more concentrated source of calories, maybe Strategy Healthy Edge, maybe Ultium. I mean, there's a lot of other options, but again, for a specific recommendation, like send us an email at our customer service and we'll be glad to help. Ooh, what kind of plant is ahi flower? I haven't heard of it. Me neither, Jesse. That was my first reaction when Mary Beth first came to us when she heard of it. So tell us about it, Mary Beth.
Yeah, so the proper Latin name of the plant is Buglosoides arvensis. It's a really, really pretty plant. It's got a nice sort of tall green stalk, and then it's got these really pretty white flowers when it's in its flowering stage. Right now, it's exclusively grown in the UK. And then once it's harvested, they separate the seeds, and then the seeds are pressed on Prince Edward Island in Canada, and then we import it from Canada into the US. So, but yeah, we hadn't heard about it before either. It's sort of fun because I joke that this is a good lesson in not ignoring a Facebook message, because I learned about ahi flower oil through a Facebook message. There was an equine nutrition scientist in the UK that had done some research in ahi flower oil. She thought it was pretty great, and we were friends on Facebook. So she sends me a Facebook message and she's like, "Hey, I think you guys might be interested in looking at this." And we had a lot of those types of little emails and like, "Oh, hey, put this in your feed. Oh, make me famous. Put this in your feed," And it is our job to look at everything. But I looked at this and went, "Oh, this is interesting. I really like it." And the more we looked and the more they came to us, the company Nature's Crops that has developed it showed us all the research they've been doing, and it just kept checking the boxes for us, which is really exciting.
Yeah, no, it is pretty exciting, and it's good when things kind of all work together for the benefit of the horse and for this new product, because otherwise, if you'd ignored that, we wouldn't be talking here today. So thanks everybody for all of the good conversation. If we didn't get to any of your questions in this live chat, we'll come back and answer them in the chat for sure afterwards. So stay tuned for that. I do just kind of want to wrap up with final thoughts, because, what are some of the things we covered today? Number one, horses need both omega-3s and omega-6s in their diet. How do you know if they're getting enough? Well, if they're eating, free choice, good quality forage, you're pretty sure that they're getting enough to at least meet their minimum requirements. Because pasture is a great source of omega-3s. So is hay, depending on the quality of the hay. But if your horse doesn't have access to pasture, or you're feeding, older hay, that's where you may want to think about providing some additional supplemental omega-3s. And, we've made that easy with these two new products, the Omega Match Ration Balancer and also the ahi flower oil. Right, Mary Beth?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
So if you want to learn more about the Omega Match products, please go to our website, and we have a landing page. There's a lot more in-depth information on both the ration balancer and the oil. There's a $5 off coupon that you can print off and use. So we just encourage you to read up on them, ask us any more questions you may have. Hannah asked again, is it okay to feed the metabolic horses? Yes, it is. We've done the studies to confirm that. It's actually a really good option, because for metabolic horses, oftentimes you keep them off pasture because it's too many calories and then there's too much risk with the sugar and starch. But they can still get the benefits of the omegas. So it's actually a really great option for, especially, those metabolic horses you have to keep off pasture. All right, guys. Well, I think that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. And if you have any ideas for future Checkerboard chats, we like to take requests. So, let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about next time. See you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.